US President Donald Trump has repeated his complaints about NATO not being there in the Iran war after a closed-door meeting with the alliance's chief, Mark Rutte.
US President Donald Trump's threats to leave NATO have created the worst crisis the alliance has ever faced, a former US ambassador to NATO said.
European leaders have welcomed the two-week ceasefire between the US and Iran brokered by Pakistan, but insist that a long-lasting solution must be found. Greece has announced a new social media ban for children under the age of 15, coming into effect on the 1st of January 2027.
An overnight closed-door meeting between NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and US President Donald Trump in Washington has failed to ease pressure on the transatlantic alliance after several NATO countries resisted Trump's calls to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump, in a social media post after the meeting, repeated his claim that the alliance was not there when the US needed them. Earlier, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, set the tone for the meeting, saying NATO failed.
I have a direct quote from the President of the United States on NATO, and I will share it with all of you. They were tested, and they failed. And I would add, it's quite sad that NATO turned their backs on the American people over the course of the last 6 weeks, when it's the American people who have been funding their defense.
After speaking with Trump for more than 2 hours, NATO chief Mark Rutte told U.S. media that Trump was, quote, clearly disappointed with many NATO allies. Rutte, however, said that even if some allies had failed to meet their commitments in the Iran operation, the large majority of Europeans had been helpful. In recent weeks, Trump has threatened to withdraw from the 32-member alliance over their refusal to join the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, especially after Tehran blocked the Strait of Hormuz, leading to a rise in global oil prices.
US President Donald Trump's threats to leave NATO, as well as confrontations with America's European allies over their refusal to join the Iran war, have created the worst crisis NATO has ever faced, former US Ambassador to NATO Ivo Daalder told Euronews.
To continue their protests.
Happened over the last 6 weeks has been extraordinarily damaging to NATO, coming on top of the extraordinarily damaging episode of agreements. And I think the 3 months that have just passed, we will look back at it as the worst crisis that NATO has had in 77 years.
Daalder said Trump's statement suggesting the US might not defend NATO allies against a future Russian military aggression have destabilized the alliance. He added that the 6-week war against Iran has depleted US military resources.
We see a divided NATO, which has been the goal of first the Soviet Union and then Russia for the better part of 80 years. A NATO that is truly at loggerheads, a NATO in which the President of the United States says, I'm not going to defend you, don't count on me, as he put it, or bye-bye, as he said on his press conference on Monday. It's a good time to test NATO if you are sitting in Moscow.
Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is in Washington, D.C. to try to ease the tensions between the US and its European allies.
European leaders have hailed the initial ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran, though key issues affecting their own interests remain. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the 2-week ceasefire brokered by Pakistan would bring much-needed de-escalation to the Middle East, while an EU Commission spokesperson said the EU is pushing for a lasting peace.
It is crucial that negotiations for an enduring solution to this conflict continue, and we as EU we will continue to coordinate with our partners, and we stand ready to support the efforts of diplomacy.
Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, one of Europe's staunchest critiques of the US-Israeli strikes, said the government of Spain will not applaud those who set the world on fire just because they show up with a bucket. The ceasefire deal was reached at the 11th hour on Tuesday evening, hours before Trump threatened Iran, saying a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. remarks that went unchallenged by most European leaders. On Monday, Trump also stated that he is not at all concerned about committing war crimes.
The announcement of a 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran, accompanied by the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, has raised hopes of a fall in fuel prices in France. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said on Wednesday that fuel prices would now have to fall.
Lorsque la crise a démarré, les prix ont augmenté très vite à la pompe, alors que les citernes avaient été achetées et remplies avant le début de la guerre. Donc autant que le gouvernement peut comprendre qu'il y ait 3 ou 4 jours de délai entre le début de ce cessez-le-feu et la répercussion à la pompe, autant qu'il est évident que les effets devront se voir à la pompe à partir de la fin du week-end, début de semaine prochaine.
But this optimism is not shared across Europe. Germany, the continent's leading economic power, is taking a much more cautious stance. Berlin believes it will take time before prices start to fall.
Die Wiedereröffnung der Straße von Hormuz braucht Zeit und führt nicht schnell unmittelbar zurück zum Status aus dem Februar. Es wird Zeit in Anspruch nehmen, bis die Schifffahrt wieder das Vorkriegsniveau erreicht und das Angebot am Weltmarkt stabilisiert ist. Und es wird dauern, bis zerstörte Produktionsanlagen wiederhergestellt sind.
The same analysis is true in certain industrial sectors. The International Air Transport Association believes that it will take months for jet fuel supplies and prices to normalize because of the disruption to the refining capacity in the Middle East. The problem is not the crude, but ensuring that the refined product is available. President Emmanuel Macron welcomed 2 French nationals who returned to Paris on Wednesday after spending almost 4 years detained in Iran on espionage charges, with the French leader hailing the end of a terrible ordeal.
Je voulais d'abord vous dire à quel point nous sommes soulagés de revoir nos proches, à quel point ça a été un bonheur immense de les prendre dans nos bras enfin. Je voulais aussi exprimer ma reconnaissance vis-à-vis des services de l'État, donc bien sûr le président de la République, bien sûr le ministre des Affaires étrangères et tous les services qui se sont mobilisés, toutes les personnes qui se sont mobilisées jusqu'au bout pour nous faire sortir de l'enfer des vignes, où nous avons vécu l'horreur quotidienne, où nous avons vécu l'arbitraire permanent.
Cécile Kohler and Jacques Paris had been under house arrest at the French embassy in Tehran ever since being freed after 3 years in prison in November, with their fate even more uncertain after US-Israeli strikes on Iran started in February. They were arrested in May 2022 at the end of a trip to Iran that their families say was for tourism. At the end of a closed-door trial, an Iranian court in October sentenced them to jail on espionage charges their families say were fabricated. The pair were among a number of Europeans caught up in what activists and some Western governments describe as a deliberate strategy of hostage-taking by Iran to extract concessions from the West.
Their mission, struggle, protest, and resistance. Their tools, provocation, performance art, and punk rock. The infamous Russian art punk provo combo Pussy Riot have embarked on a European tour. The tour kicked off in Paris on the 2nd of April. Next, the Russian group, famous for their rock prayer at Christ the Savior Cathedral, for which the members received actual prison sentences in 2012, performed in central France. They were hosted by the City of Tours at the iconic local venue Bateau Ivre. Riot Days is a performance based on the books by activist and artist Maria Alyokina.
Это шоу о том, что случилось с нами и с нашей страной за последние 10 лет. Это акция Pussy Riot, это ключевые события в истории, современной истории нашей страны, такие как аннексия Крыма, убийство Алексея Навального, протестные митинги с 14 по 22 год.
Says Maria as she puts on an electronic ankle monitor, which Russian police used to track individuals under house arrest. She fled abroad with it in 2022, and now it serves as a prop in the group's concerts. Last September, the members of Pussy Riot were sentenced in absentia to prison terms ranging from 8 to 13 years under a law regarding the dissemination of fake news about the Russian military, which is how the authorities label any report on the actual situation in the war, as well as the very word war when applied to Ukraine. And in December 2025, the group was designated an extremist organization. According to the activist, their loved ones in Russia are in effect being held hostage by the authorities.
Были произведены достаточно жесткие обыски у всех родственников, всей команды, которая получила уголовное дело. Классика в 6 утра, взломанные двери, люди в масках, 6-часовые допросы, стращания, угрозы с оружием.
From arrests at anti-war protests and police violence to attacks on residential buildings in Ukrainian cities, Navalny in court the day before his death, and journalist Levina's self-immolation outside the Ministry of Internal Affairs building, footage on a screen mounted on stage immerses the audience in the grim reality of Russia.
Пятый год пошел войны, люди погибают там, это живые, настоящие люди. И мне кажется, важно напоминать об этом, рассказывать об этом, показывать ужасы войны в том числе. Важно напоминать людям о том, что в каком состоянии находится Россия и что с ней происходит. Потому что я думаю, что в Европе есть люди, которые до сих пор верят, что с Россией можно как-то договориться, как-то построить какие-то мосты.
According to the participants, the war in Ukraine has been overshadowed in the media as of late by other conflicts in the Middle East, and Europe underestimates the power of Russian propaganda. After France, riot days will be shown in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, and the UK. Pussy Riot, with a different lineup, will perform at the Venice Biennale in May with a protest statement against Russia's presence at the event.